Hey, my name is Alex and this is quick update on the Russian-Ukrainian war from the perspective of someone living within it. Let's start with an overview of the situation on the front line. On the Kupiansk direction, the enemy during a massive offensive managed to enter and consolidate in the eastern part of Kislivka and along the railway on the trench up to 1.8 kilometers wide and up to 600 meters deep. Active combat operations continue. On the Liman direction, no change have been recorded in the last period. However, footage of Russian soldiers being taken prisoners somewhere in this direction has appeared.
Руки нахуй! Ходи по одному! На колени встали! Сколько здесь было?
On the Siversky direction, the situation appears to be stabilized at the moment. There have been no advances by the Russian army. Here is a video of the battles in the Bilogoryvsky Chok quarry area. This is perhaps the most difficult sections of the entire Luhansk front, defended by the renowned 81st Separate Airborne Assault Brigade. On the Chasiv Yar direction, a high pace of combat operations continue west of Bogdanivka, in the area of the Listviny Forest, the Styupki-Golubovsky Nature Reserve 2nd, and in Ivanovsky. Russian forces have partially succeeded along Voronezhka Street and towards Zelena Street, advancing up to 200 meters. Active fighting is ongoing in Chasiv Yar, where the enemy is attempting to encircle the city operationally, but has had no success in the last 7 days. According to Yuri Fedorenko, the commander of Achilles Battalion of Strike Unmanned Aerial Vehicle Complexes, defense forces have significant successes in holding positions. Battles are fought for every street, every house on the approaches to the city. There are no Russians in the most populated area, the military reported. Fighters of the 225th Brigade of Armored Forces of Ukraine repelled an enemy attack on the Chasiv Yar direction, destroying 3 units of armored vehicles. The Avdiivka direction remains the most difficult. Building on some tactical success here, the Russians are continuous its pressure. Russian soldiers are burning and dying practically around the clock, but they keep pushing. Numerous losses are confirmed by numerous posts on social media. In practically every one of my videos, I present examples of such posts. Here is another one for today, for example. Out of the first platoon mobilized from the Bashkortostan, Russia, only 3 people survived. In the Russian army, a platoon typically consists of 10 to 60 soldiers, for reference. In Novokalinovo, the enemy has advanced along Stavkova Street to a depth of 650 meters and along Pershot-Travneva Street to a depth of 780 meters. Enemy infantry has approached close to the settlement of Keramik. On the video, a Ukrainian tank destroys a temporary location of 20 Russian soldiers. On Thursday, April 25th, 20 Russians attempt to sneak into a closest house in Novokalinovo unnoticed, but aerial reconnaissance spotted them in time. The defense forces tank halted further accumulation of infantry here by destroying the enemy's location. The western part of Ocheretino has come under the control of Russian forces. The enemy has had partial success in the northern and northeastern direction on the stretch up to 2.7 kilometers wide and 720 meters deep. Fresh video footage shows a burning Russian tank somewhere in the area of the village of Ocheretino. South of Solovyovo and Novobakhmutivka, the enemy is attacking along the forest belt in the southern direction. Russians have captured the village of Semenivka and Berdichi and advanced along the forest belt in the northerly direction on a stretch up to 2.7 kilometers wide and 1.2 kilometers deep. Semenovka has been a grey area for some time, but rotation of Russian infantry here have been prevented by our fighters, making the move into the village a one-way journey for the Russians. Battles continue. Destroying of enemy personnel in Pervomaisk continues. Russians are not giving up attempts to consolidate there. Currently, they are increasing pressure on the southern outskirts of Pervomaisk and in the vicinity of the orchards. Kurakhova direction. Active combat operations continue in the southern and southeast part of Krasnohorivka on the Kurachovo direction. Drone operator from the 80th Separate Air Assault Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces destroyed another tank near Krasnohorivka. No changes have been observed in the rest of the front lines. Skirmishes arise here and there. For example, on the Tavria direction, fighters from the 503rd Separate Marine Battalion of the Ukrainian Armed Forces attacked enemy infantry with the drone drops on the left bank of the Kherson region. Another incident recorded approximately in the same area is a strike with the precision-guided MLRS, presumably JMLRS, on a Russian command post in the Zaporizhia region. The analytical group Rokan Consulting published a graph of the numbers of Russian and Ukrainian units in Donetsk region. As expected, the situation for Ukraine in Donetsk region has hardly changed since February. Conversely, the Russians have added around 20 new units. We expect this difference to continue growing throughout the spring. It can be seen that as of the September of last year, the forces were nearly equal. A sharp increase in personnel by the Russians started from October, the beginning of the active phase of battles for Avdiivka. Simultaneously, the Russians launched an active offensive in the Donetsk and Marvinka-Novy Mikhailivsky direction. Therefore, from the conditional parity in September to now, the Russians outnumber Ukrainians twofold and continue to widen this gap every month. Russian advances are greatly assisted by aerial bombs and superiority in the quantity of artillery shells. They simply put bombs on a conveyor belt and bomb everything incessantly, practically with impunity. Some of the shells are manufactured locally, while others are supplied by North Korea or Iran. The risk of the enemy's aviation and artillery continue to level residential quarters and outskirts of Chasiv Yar. The Russians' tactics remain unchanged. They destroyed and burned everything in their path, turning populated areas into ruins and ashes. And this is how the city of Chasiv Yar looks from the inside now. There is a video of Vuhledar, which is also constantly under Russian aerial bomb attacks, aimed and destroyed as much as possible. Here, Russian aviation strike at the village of Urozhaine, Donetsk region, using FAB-500 bombs with precision-guided kits. FAB-500 bomb is something similar to what was recently shown a few videos back, lying in the field. And this is how the occupied city of Bakhmut looks now, as every city to which the Russians can reach will look if they are not stopped here and now. Desolate, mined, burned out wasteland, where death permeates everything, once a thriving city ruined by Russian army. Once again, hope rests on F-16 fighter jets, which are expected to arrive in Ukraine soon. But only practice will show whether they will be an effective countermeasure. US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, speaking at a Defense Contact Group meeting on Ukraine, announced that F-16 aircraft will begin arriving in Ukraine this year along with trained pilots. Within the Ukrainian forces, there is still a shortage in practically everything. President Biden announced that weapons for Ukraine will be sent as early as this week. According to the Ramstein data, the US has announced its largest aid package of $6 billion. The package, part of the $61 billion in Ukraine funding signing into law by President Joe Biden on Wednesday, will include Patriot air defense munition, artillery ammunition, drones, counter-drone weapons, and air-to-air missiles to be fitted on fighters' planes. The mentioned armament will be delivered to Ukraine over the course of several years. While expecting deliveries from the West to Ukraine, the Russian The Russians in this day will attempt to strike the Western aid, ambush somewhere during the transfer, or spot a warehouse. Therefore, the western regions of Ukraine will evidently come under more active missile strikes now. Thus, in the night of April 27, Russian forces launched a combined missile strike on Ukraine with missiles of various types. In total, the Russians deployed 34 missiles of air, ground and sea-based launch. As a result of air combat, 21 air targets were destroyed by Ukrainian forces out of 34 missiles in total. Approximate rollout of Russian cruise missiles during this attack. As we can see, the western regions received the brunt of the attack. Ukraine, in turn, in recent days has struck important infrastructure targets in Russia with drones. Thus, Ukrainian drones reached and exploded at the Ilsk petroleum refinery in Slavyansk-na-Kubani, Krasnodar Krai, Russia. As a result of the drone attack on the refinery, a rectification column was damaged. Ukrainian drones also visited the military airfield in Stanitsa Kushevska, Krasnodar Krai, Russia. This strike targeted modules of precision-guided kits for aviation bombs. Russian sources have reported damage to several aircraft, presumably Su-34, and their partial destruction. The airfield is actively used by the Russian Air Forces to carry out airstrikes on Ukraine using bombs with precision-guided kits. Even based on available video footage, the strike can be considered successful. The main intelligence directorate of Ukraine also reported the destruction of a Ka-32 helicopter at an airfield in Moscow. Obviously, it was burned by guerrillas. The Russians understand that fighting against the armed forces of Ukraine will be more challenging for them in the near future, so they are rushing to advance before the arrival of Western aid, while continuing to build new fortifications on their own and captured territories. Example of Russia's defense expansion along the border with Ukraine can be seen near Pokachevo, Belgorod region, where new fortifications were recently constructed. Closer to the front line, Russian forces are expanding existing network of defensive structures. For example, in the past months, fortifications near Novofyodorivka, Zaporizhia region, have been expanded. Many new fortifications built by Russia over the past 2 years in occupied Ukraine intersect with old defensive structures built between 214 and 222. In anticipation of destruction of the Crimea Bridge, which they have been talking about constantly on all TV channels lately, the Russians continued to rapidly build railway connection to the occupied territories through the occupied land corridor. The old existing railway, which they are trying to use, is marked with the black dashed dot lines. The red dashed dot lines indicate the new section that the Russian plan to build. This is farther away from the front line. So, the destroyed in January by AFU railway bridge near Khranitne, which is supposed to connect with the railway to Russia-occupied Mariupol, has been completed. Compared to March 2024, the bridge and the track have been completed. Russians are preparing to lay rails at high speed. You can see the state of the track in March and in April. There are active works of laying rails and nearby fortification, in particular Dragon Teeth. Under these conditions, we risk seeing the first full-fledged railway connection with Mariupol by mid-May 2024, a spoonful of honey in a barrel of tar. It took Russians almost a year to restore and build this section. Therefore, their dreams of a functioning land railway to Crimea by 2025 are purely unrealistic dreams. And another noticeable thing, the Russians are preparing to display destroyed NATO equipment at the Victory Day parade. It will be interesting to see their reaction of the Crimean bridge finally collapsed on that day. So the Russians are dragging everything they could gather in 2.5 years of war. But obviously, this is not enough equipment, so they are dragging everything indiscriminately. For example, the German anti-tank self-propelled gun Marder II from the Second World War. Why? Maybe they mistook it for the BMP Marder 1A3, which Germany is transferring to Ukraine. Not clear for me. What else are the Russians dragging, judging from the video? British Saxon truck and some NATO truck, Ukrainian Bogdan medical vehicle and British Husky, Australian Bushmaster, somehow without blocks under the armor capsule and Humvee, French IMX-10R wheeled reconnaissance vehicle, Finnish XA-180 Sisu and another Humvee. Well, I bet Russian propaganda will talk for weeks now that NATO has already lost the war. And that wraps up today's video. If you found this information helpful or somehow insightful, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. And I hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye!